Hi, this is Tim Lightfellow in Kingdom of Ontario, Society for Creative Anachronism, and this video is about putting tips on arrows or bolts. This applies to both making new ones and replacing. The one exception is if you're replacing and you're taking the old one off rather than having lost it, you would want to start the process by heating the tip and having pliers or something to pull the tip off with. And I don't have one to do, so I'm not doing an example of that. I'll be actually demonstrating putting tips on new bolts instead. The other thing to be careful of if you're replacing is if it has dried glue, you want to try and get some of that off if you can before you put the new glue on. Okay, before we get started, let's discuss glues. I use high temperature hot melt glue. And so here's one example. This is actually some stuff I bought recently that is not quite what we had been using, but it's been all I could find. The stuff I had used was more yellow than this. But the point being, it takes a higher temperature than like the standard craft glue gun glue does to melt it. So it uses an alcohol burner or a torch to heat it up. Here's another example. You can see how much more amber yellow this is. This one's obviously rather large around, makes it a little challenging to put on the tip of an arrow, but it works just fine. Another example a lot of people will be familiar with is ferrultite, which is what you tend to find at most archery supply places. Between these two behave very much the same. You heat it up, it tends to just kind of soften so you can spread it on the tip just fine. Whereas I've noticed with this, if it gets too hot, it becomes very drippy. And I actually turned a section of my skin white at one point because of this dripping on it and burning so fast. So be aware of this, that you have to be cautious just how long you leave it in the flame to heat up before you put it on the tip, or it can drip on or onto things around you that then stick to it. Okay, so for this example, I will go with this. I am using an alcohol burner filled with denatured alcohol. As mentioned, you can also use a torch. And let me grab a quick example. If you're doing this out in the field, if you're like at an event and needing to replace a tip fast, what I carry with me for that kind of thing for one-offs is a butane torch that's refillable. And so the process is the same. And out in the field, obviously this is my home kit. I've got a wood block, I've got the alcohol burner and stuff. You can find a rock if you have a table you can press against, so you can make it a much smaller kit for your, or much smaller footprint for your travel kit than what I use at home when I'm doing like a dozen or 2 dozen bolts. So process is the same. What I do is I heat up, trying to find the, feels like the alcohol's in the wick. The wick is not seeming to want to light. There we go. Let the flame settle up for a moment. And then, so in this case, I'm using 11/32 100 grain, which are glue-on field tips. They are sold at most places. Some of them will refer to them as, I think they call it a 5-degree taper point on some of the archery sites. And for these, sometimes if they're really kind of dirty, you can soak them in an alcohol or something to clean them off. You can wipe the inside quick with like a tissue or something right before you put them on. There are various ways to do it. These ones have seemed to be pretty clean and pretty good when I've been using them. I've had a couple that showed up that I could just tell by touching them that they were coated in grime, so I made sure on those ones to wipe them out. The idea being you want the glue to stick between the metal and the wood, and if there's debris inside, it can reduce the bond and make it more likely that your tips will fall off. So I just line up a few. I'm going to change the camera angle a bit here so you can see all the steps. Okay, so again, I have the glue stick, I have the alcohol burner, I have the block of wood. And if you look, you might be able to see it in the camera. I'm not sure. There's little divots in the wood from doing this. So the basic process, and I'll explain it before I start, is going to be that I'm going to heat up glue. I'm going to put glue on the tip. I'm going to put on the tapered end of the shaft. I'm going to take the tip, put it on. By that point, the glue is usually already somewhat cold. And so I then heat up the tip, which heats the glue under it. And then I'm going to press it here to get a tight compression fit. And then I'll kind of explain more of that as I'm doing it. So I literally just am running the glue over the heat and rubbing it on the tip. Sometimes, especially the first time or two, I'll heat it up a couple times just to make sure I have enough glue there. Like I said, I'm going to push the tip on, but you'll notice it's already fairly cool to the touch. So the tip's only going to go on so far. I am then going to carefully, on this step, you want to be cautious that you aren't getting the flame on the shaft itself because it is wood and it will leave burn marks. I've actually done that once or twice where the sealant I used turned colors because of getting heated. Okay, now you see the tip moving around, which means that it is hot and the glue's melted. I'm pushing this in here. So what you'll notice, and I'm doing this with a fair amount of force, if you can see that, the excess glue is bubbling out the top of the tip. So what I do here is I spin it every so often and push. And what this is designed to do is to help center the tip. Because when you taper them, the taper tools aren't always exactly center. And so by pressing in different orientations, you can help actually center up the way the tip's going on. I also often with this glue will blow on the tip a little bit to try and help that glue cool. So I'm going to mute the mic so you don't have to hear that. Okay, and I keep it usually about this long, somewhere near a minute-ish. I'm generally looking for the glue to be changing colors because when it's melted, it's fairly clear looking. And then as it cools, it turns back somewhat white like that. So I'm generally watching for it to start turning back to that color. So I know that it's actually done cooling enough that that bond is secure. I set this aside. Normally I would put it either down against the wall. We have hardwood floors here, just so you know. If we had vinyl or even carpet, I'd be a little hesitant because that tip can still be pretty hot. In this case, I'm just going to set it so the tip's hanging off the table. And I will move on to the next one. Figure I'll do 2 or 3 just so you kind of see the process a few times. And then the other part of that is, again, you saw the excess glue. Obviously, we want to remove that. We don't want lumps of glue sticking out of the tip on the arrow or bolt. So what I've discovered just through the numbers of these that I've done is that at the pace I do this, typically I typically do the first 3 bolts or arrows. You'll hear me just say bolts because that's what I'm working on, but the same process applies to arrows. So I typically do the first 3, and when I finish that 3rd one, I go back to the first one and I peel that excess glue off. This gives it time to cool enough that I can touch it without risking burning fingers, but it's usually warm and pliable enough that it will peel off without any risk of it trying to peel off any kind of the wood or the sealant or anything. The sealant I use is thankfully not typically something that peels off, so I've had some where they got super cold and I was still able to remove it. It's just a lot harder once it's really cold to get the glue itself to let go. So that's why I've tried to do it kind of as part of the process. Again, I need to blow on the thing, so just a moment. Okay, so again, we have the glue actually showing white, so put that over there, grab the next one, heat up the glue. Also try occasionally to change the direction I'm using the glue stick on, because otherwise you end up with it forming a ridge. And then you have the thinner section that has that's the ridge melting faster than the other, and so it can get too hot and a little drippy itself if you're not cautious. Okay, so again, I don't think this is going to show very well, but what I'm watching for as I heat it is I see the tip usually slide up a little bit and I see it moving around more, and that's what tells me that the glue is melted. And you'll notice that time the tip kind of fell off, so I just try and scoop it back on and then press down with it. Thankfully that doesn't happen very often, but it can. And one thing to be clear of is I'm pressing down this whole time. So every time I turn it and that, I'm still keeping a downward force on it to help keep it tight. I've had once or twice where the glue ended up just like right kind of around the top of the taper, and so there was an air pocket. And so I would do this and then I'd pick it up and the tip would fall off. So that's why one of the things is making sure you get a fair covering of the glue. And with practice, you kind of get a feel for how much to avoid having too much of it coming out the top. Sometimes it happens though, and you end up with a lot. Okay, So like I said, I've 3 done, so now I'm going back to the first one, and it's cool enough to the touch. And what I'm doing is using my fingernail, and I'm just peeling the glue off the tip, off of around it, so that when it says shot, it's a nice smooth surface instead of having globs of glue in the way. So that is the process. I have 11 more to do because I started out with a dozen plus 2. No reason to show you all the rest of them. Like I said, if you're removing a tip, if you're starting out with something with a tip that is damaged or something and you're replacing it, or you're wanting to switch weight grains of the tip, again, these are 100 grain, maybe you want a 125 because you found they fly better. The process then would be to heat it, to use pliers, multi-tool, whatever, pull the tip off. Tips are reusable if they're not broken and damaged. And then you could put the next tip on, or put the glue on, put the next tip on, and follow this process. So I hope that helps. Have a good day, and thank you for watching.